the Watchtower again. The first thing Mara noticed on the ferry was how the town's horizon kept the sea at arm's length, as though something their preferred distance. Gallow's reach had a look of careful shutting, shutters clamped, doors bolted, nets rolled like sleeping mouths. She stepped onto the salt-stiffened quay with her grandfather's journal wrapped in oilskin and a brass key she had found beneath an old floorboard. The key warmed in her palm like a heartbeat, and already the Watchtower loomed above the town, dark and deliberate. Mara had come to close an estate and catalog objects. She had not intended to unravel histories. Yet the journal's margins were stitched with notes, dates crossed out, and a single recurring phrase circled until the ink bled. Room above lantern. The town's rumor had been less precise. The Watchtower has rooms no one climbs, people said, but ink was definite, and keys invited answers. She found Tom Hargreaves in a narrow shop, his fingers thick with calluses, and he did not smile when she asked about the tower. Tom's warnings came in the form of small details. "You don't want to poke at old things," he said, as if poking were a contagion. He told a story that kept sliding away from specifics, shadows that lingered on the stairs, a smell that layered over seawater. He admitted the tower's door had been sealed since the old keeper's tenure, and that the town preferred it so. Mara felt the professional itch. An archivist can't leave a locked story unscrutinized. She left Tom uneasy and went to the tower at dusk. The tower's stones held grooves like old knuckles. Mara thumbed the brass key until its symbol matched nothing she knew. The main door opened with a sound that was less a creak than an apology. Inside, the stairwell spiraled, narrow enough to keep voices compact and thoughts close. Each step echoed differently, as if remembering other footsteps. She carried the lantern up with her, the cone of light confident and inadequate at once. Higher, the air grew less like sea and more like paper and sleep. At the landing beneath the lantern, the key turned with a reluctant dignity. The door gave way to a small room, dust arranged into patterns by the absent drafts. Shelves held objects that felt like memory in object form. A child's carved boat without the child's name, a tin box of shipping labels, and a photograph folded into a corner so the faces were obscured. On a small table lay her grandfather's map, linen frayed to the edges, and a single black dot pressed into a place that was not quite a place. The journal and map argued with each other. Ink notes traced routes not present on the linen. The black dot sat where no chart had agreed it should be. Mara unfolded the photograph with care. A woman looked out at her from the grainy paper, features softened by time, and a margin of handwriting named Nobody. The bearings in the map and the circular scribbles in the journal felt less like instruction and more like insistence. She slept in a chair in the room that night, the lantern's cone like a watchful eye on her knuckles. Outside, the town hummed in clipped sibilance, doors closing at odd hours. Shutters slid like lids. Mara heard footsteps below, not the town's usual measured ones, but smaller, patient ones that paused and resumed, as if trying to remember whether they belonged there. She opened the tower's small shutters and watched Tom's silhouette cut along the street as he checked windows himself. The two of them arranged like folded halves of the same concern. He passed a look up at the tower, was equal parts apology and warning. Sleep frayed into notes at the margins of sleep. The journal offered a line she'd missed. It remembers what it was taught. Mara tried to teach the room back, speaking aloud names, dates, her grandfather's laugh. But the room replied with silence that felt stitched rather than empty. Small things moved in measured, unconvincing ways. A page turned on its own crease. A photograph shifted a fraction closer to light. Each change suggested an attention that was not quite human, like a thing practicing manners. She began to chart the room, making lists in the journal in a new hand that was impatient and apologetic. Lines connected circled phrases to map coordinates and to a series of brief notations. Times, tides, names erased and rewritten. The black dot on the map remained obstinately mute. On the seventh night, there came a sound like a hand pressed to glass, not outside, but from within the wall itself, a dry, patient tapping, as if some internal clock had decided to communicate, trying to be helpful. Tom returned one evening with a lantern and a way of standing that suggested years spent negotiating weather and people. He did not say, "I told you so." He offered instead a softer cadence of facts. Keep the lantern lit at night. Do not leave photographs uncovered. If you find a seam in the plaster, do not press. He spoke as if recalling promises once made. Mara heard in his voice the kind of fear that is partly reverence, a fear that acknowledges some duty to the thing that unsettles you and vows to keep its boundaries intact. The lamp burned and the tower kept its watch. Nights stretched into quiet cartographies of movement. A photograph slid, a page flipped, a scent of lemon, and sea that did not belong to the world outside. Mara started to dream the room into being, doors opening to staircases she had not found, rooms laid end to end with familiar furniture arranged like a memory of someone else's afternoon. Each morning, she woke with a small piece of the dream retained on her tongue. A phrase, a cadence, a name she could not claim. The pattern tilted the night. She found the second photograph beneath the floorboard, by the table leg, a face she recognized not by features, but by posture. It matched a sketch in the journal, a woman looking out, but her eyes had been deliberately erased in ink. Mara pressed the photograph to the lantern's glass, and for a breath it seemed the woman looked back, the dark smudge where the eyes should be resolving into understanding. Mara told herself it was candlelight trickery. The trickery answered with the careful patience of something listening. That night, the tapping returned with purpose. It formed a slow rhythm, 3 soft taps, pause, 1 long. The sound mapped onto nothing she knew. She tried counting tides, hours, old rhyme schemes, and failed. In the pause, she began to speak in response, not words so much as invitations, the kind you offer to someone across a room. If you remember, answer. Her voice sounded smaller than the room, but the tapping moved closer, as if whatever kept time within the wall wished to be understood. The sense of being watched became less accusatory and more like a conversation with a patient neighbor. When she pressed a finger to the plaster where the tapping radiated, the wall gave like skin between breath and memory. There was a seam hairline, almost apologetic. Mara eased a small blade and lifted slats of old board. Behind them lay a narrow cavity, layered with paper and a child's child's toy carved from driftwood. At the very back, wrapped in oilskin to keep something private even from light, was a letter addressed in her grandfather's hand, but signed with an initial she did not know. The room's insistence had offered itself like a reluctant confidant. She read the letter with a throat that kept hiccuping between grief and recognition. The words were careful and kind, telling a story not of ghosts, but of habit. How the room had once been used to teach memory to those who feared they'd lose it. The black dot on the map, the erased eyes, the circled phrase, they were part of a ritual to keep a past from unraveling, to fold it, tuck it, and store it where weather could not dissolve it. The letter closed on an instruction. Return it to light when you're ready. Mara thought she understood. The room had been a receptacle, a place to keep memory that might otherwise wash away. But understanding simplified the ache. The more she opened, the more the room returned items not as proof, but as interlocutors. Faces in photographs seemed to shift posture overnight, not menacing, but like witnesses leaning forward when a story finally starts. The Watchtower no longer felt abandoned. It felt like a house waiting for its conversation to be finished. And Mara understood that some conversations resist ending. The last night before she planned to leave, Mara left the lantern beside the map and opened the shutters wide for the first time. The dawn came thin as a promise. She placed the photograph and letter on the table and waited, not exactly expecting an answer, but willing to be present for whatever the room offered. The air shifted, and the photograph slid a little nearer the map's black dot. Then, as sunlight stained the edges of the room, something like recognition moved through the space, gentle, inevitable. And Mara felt as if a long-negotiated truce had finally been signed.